Matthew Hooton is gloating beside me at the table here in the studio. Thank you everyone for being with us. We're just going to whack up. Kelvin, can we put up a shot of the Beehive Theaterette? Now, once again, it's the same old lectern and the same young reporter who is trying to get a live shot out of his iPhone. But we understand Winston Peters is about to arrive there and make whatever announcement he is going to make. We will cross there live the moment that happens, but there does seem to now be a sense that it is imminent. To discuss that, and we're going to stay on here until it happens, within reason, of course. I would say probably March or April, we'd call it quits. To discuss this as we wait, and then as we try and make sense of it afterwards, former Press Secretary, PR man. What are you, Matthew Hooton?
Radio New Zealand political commentator.
You're wearing a red shirt on the phone. So Matthew Hooton is behind me in the studio with a red shirt. Former United Future leader and Cabinet Minister Peter Dunne, who's worked with both National and Labour and Coalition. Peter, are you there?
Yes, I am, John. Hello.
Hey, lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And former leader and deputy leader of the Alliance, Sandra Lee, who was a Cabinet Minister in the Labour Alliance Coalition, on the line from Whakatane. Kia ora, Sandra, are you there?
Kia ora, John. Nui kia koe.
Yeah, lovely to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. Which way do you think it's going to go, Sandra Lee?
God, when it's Winston, who knows? But I've been of the view that his cultural attachment to the National Party would tend to see him lean towards a national coalition, even though clearly there's far, far greater policy alignment with Labour. Having said that, I think Bill English will be pulling out all the stops to try and achieve a national New Zealand First government. He has always been the bridesmaid in terms of being a genuine New Zealand Prime Minister, and I think it's a ball he wouldn't want to drop. Having said all that, as a lefty and a socialist, I'd be delighted to be wrong in this case.
Peter Dunne, what are you picking?
Well, I don't have a view, actually, John. I think there are strong arguments for going with National, strong arguments against, and equally so on the Labour side. And I think that's probably why it's taking so long for New Zealand First to finalise a position, because I think they're damned whatever they do, frankly.
Yes, and there has been lots of frustration from people saying, why is it taking so long? Well, it's taking so long because it's important, right? Now, far be it from me, a journalist, to defend Winston Peters, because I'm sure if the boot was on the other foot, he wouldn't respond in kind. But actually, it's important to get this as right as you possibly can, because it matters, Peter Dunne.
That's correct. I don't have a problem with the time it's taking. I do have a problem with the way in which it's been played out, where I think both Jacinda Ardern and Bill English have been very weak in terms of their leadership of this process. They've handed all the cards to Peters, and I think they'll both rue the day, whichever one of them it is that ends up holding the poison chalice of Prime Minister. But the fact that it's taken 20-odd days, I don't really have a problem with that.
Matthew Hooton is sitting beside me. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Sandra. So Sandra, fearing National, hoping for Labour. Peter saying he doesn't know. Matthew Hooton, you were making big predictions in the NBR some considerable time ago, weren't you?
Yeah, well, I said back in March that Labour should make Jacinda Ardern leader if they wanted to win this election, and I predicted a Labour New Zealand First government back in August.
And actually that's on the record. I mean, that's in writing from the beginning of August in the NBR, yeah.
And that was on the front page there. And I think the best thing for Winston Peters is to form a government with the Labour Party. He has been part of governments towards the end of their cycle, twice with, of course, Jim Bolger and then with Helen Clark.
Yep.
And they have ended for different reasons, badly for him. And this at least is an opportunity for him to start something new, for him to be part of something new. And there's a good chance it will fail. The majority here is going to be Golres, Chloe Swarbrick and Eugenie Sage. And on the other hand, there's going to be Shane Jones and Ron Mark. So it's going to be difficult keeping this government together if it is the government we're expecting. But nevertheless, there is at least a chance it will be successful.
At some level, when we opted, so Our first MMP election was in 1996, which meant we voted for it in 93, right? At some level, when we opted for MMP, wasn't precisely that kind of broad chapel what we were hoping for, that governments would be more inclusive than they were under first past the post, more representative of as many New Zealanders as possible?
Sure, I still think we have a fairly immature proportional representation system, as Peter was referring to, really. In most proportional representation systems, the two big parties, Labour and National or their equivalents, will at least keep the possibility open of maybe one day having a grand coalition, and that keeps the small parties a little bit in check. And also, as we're seeing in Germany right now, Angela Merkel's equivalent centre-right National Party, the Christian Democrats, is negotiating with the Green Party there. And that also creates a more dynamic situation. In this case, as Peter was saying, Winston Peters, through very skillful political talents, has got himself where he has huge power.
Yeah.
But fair enough, if National and Labour and the Greens all want to have these policies that they won't talk to one another, then fair enough what Winston Peters has done here, and it looks like he's going to get 4 cabinet posts.
Extraordinary.
With 7% of the vote.
Absolutely extraordinary. Sandra Lee, can I come back to you, because you, the alliance made disparate parties work together, and then it fell apart. How hard will it be for the Greens and New Zealand First to be part of the same government?
I don't think it'll be fatal, and I think it is far more high risk for Winston Peters to go with National. And I say that because Winston is a very traditional conservative. His political hero was Rob Muldoon. He's anti the neoliberal policies of this government, and this government is made up, National, of ardent free marketeers. And in my view, that's going to be a far more volatile mix than any relationship that Winston Peters will have to deal with the Greens, who are very intelligent people, who are strategic enough to want change for the betterment of New Zealand. Can I just pick up on one point too? Let it be remembered that after all the issues in this remarkable election campaign that were discussed, poverty, homelessness and all the rest of it, fabulous. I know we've had a lull and a very boring period, but let it be remembered that all these negotiations ought not to be under MMP about power for power's sake alone. And that's why, to me, the notion of a grand Labour coalition, Labour-National coalition, is ludicrous. The whole idea of MMP in its very introduction was in a reaction to a first-past-the-post system that could not rid our country of the ideology of a then Labour government and Rogernomics. So hopefully, once any government is announced, those important issues that were all right up front during this election campaign will be brought back into focus rather than just the issues of Winston and personalities.
Peter Dunne, can I come to you? And I want to pick up on a couple of points Sandra Lee was making, but I also want to ask you about the strength you have when you were being courted by National and Labour, and you worked with both parties. And, in fact, your strength is never greater than in this courtship period. And then, of course, you run the risk of your identity being subsumed, of you simply being lost beneath the business of government. How do you achieve the balancing act? And how do you do what Sandra was talking about, which is put ideals and policies to the forefront rather than personalities and power?
Yeah, and it's been a very difficult balancing act, which I don't think anyone has successfully managed to date. What tends to happen, and I can speak with bitter experience about this really, is that if you're announcing policies that you've worked on and you've achieved and they're part of your program that are positive for the government, it will claim the credit.
Yeah, that's right.
If they are not positive for the government or are seen as things the government's not committed to, you wear it by yourself. So you don't get the praise for the good things you do. You get the blame for the things that go wrong because it was your votes that let that through. You could have voted against that legislation. You could have stopped them. And that sort of blurs the perception that you're in some sort of a team environment. You've got to play for the team. But it's not the majority party that cops the flak for unpopular decisions. It's the minor parties that cop the flak for letting them do it. And until we can move away from that sort of mentality, I think this whole process is is going to have a certain repetitious effect where small parties will come and small parties will go, because they can never break out of the shadow of the big parties.
Yeah.
And what I think the big parties have got to do, and they've not done to date, is really start to think about how they nurture support parties that are going to endure.
I disagree with that, Peter.
We'd love to work with you after the election, but you go out there and get your numbers and then we'll talk to you. And, it's your fault if they don't get a majority.
The issue, it seems to me, is if small parties are going to be successful in an MMP environment, they must not be parties that are nurtured by either Labour or National. Now, we are moving really towards a four-party system where we have a Labour and National government, Labour and National parties, which are the traditional centrist, leaning one to the right, one to the left parties. We also have a nationalist party, which is traditional in most countries where there's people who are concerned about globalisation and immigration, and it has about 10% of the vote on a good day. And, of course, we have a strong environmental party. And the New Zealand First Party has now lasted for more than a quarter of a century. That's quarter of the time that the Labour Party has existed. The Green Party, of course, has an identity which is separate and distinct from Labour. And, parties like ACT or United Future, or obviously the Maori Party, which has now got too close to National, which were nurtured. National did fundraisers for the Maori Party. This is not the future of MMP with the parties like those, with due respect to Peter, who's had a very successful career.
Absolutely. And we're working with both parties. New Zealand First formed in 1993. As Sandra Lee, it is an enduring success story because whilst they were tossed out in 2008, right? Yes, they were. So they had one term. So since 1993, they've had one term outside Parliament, which is a phenomenal success story, really, because you, Sandra Lee, and you, Peter Dunne, know how hard it is to stay there.
Yes. Winston needs a fair amount of credit for the way that he has ensured that he's kept New Zealand First head above water throughout all these years. But what he's done is he's ensured that he has a fundamental support base that identify specifically and uniquely with New Zealand First. And the same can be said for the Greens. When political parties appear to have been manipulated by convenience to bolster any political major party in Parliament, then they almost inadvertently write their own death warrant.
Sorry, Sandra, can I, because that's such a good point to go to Peter Dunne on. Peter Dunne, is that what happened to you? Is that what happened to your party?
No, that wasn't the point that I was making. What I was really alluding to was the fact that the situation that we've got into, which people are unhappy with in the wake of this election, where New Zealand First appears to hold all the cards, is because the National Party and the Labour Party, to some extent, were bereft of alternatives. Now, all I'm saying is it's one thing to bemoan the fact that you don't have alternatives. It's another thing to do to make sure you do have alternatives. I'm not suggesting you create, which was, I think, the Morris Williamson solution of many, many years ago, sort of like cocoon parties within a major party. I'm not saying that at all. But I think you do need to work more strongly with those parties who you have traditionally worked with, to support them, to make sure that you continue to work with them. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where one rogue party, and in the context of not being part of the major blocks, New Zealand First is that, holds from time to time all the cards, and people say this is terrible for MMP. Well, no, it's a consequence, really, of people not understanding MMP.
Peter Dunne, I just want to come in. If you have just joined us, welcome to Checkpoint. So Sandra Lee, Matthew Hooton and Peter Dunne, and we are talking while we wait for, and we've got the shot coming in from the Beehive Theaterette, which we're going to put up on air now. The lectern is set to go. The journalists are gathering. And we are waiting for what we understand is an imminent announcement from Winston Peters and New Zealand First. So that's why we are talking, and we are waiting for that announcement, and we will go to it live the moment it happens. Matthew Hooton, you are expecting he will go with Labour.
Yeah, what has been rumoured, and everything's been rumoured, and for all we know, he's going to turn up and announce that Bill English is going to have a fourth term. But what has been rumoured is that the Greens would have this big conference call of 150 to 170 delegates after an announcement was made that Winston Peters preferred to go with Labour. Now, that Green Party conference call has been scheduled every night for 6 p.m. And at about mid-afternoon each day since last Thursday, an email has gone out to the Green Party delegates saying, sorry, no phone call tonight. Now, what happened today is that the conference call was confirmed. The Green Party delegates were told it's not going to be 6, it's going to be 7, which suggests that an announcement from Winston Peters is expected before 7.
Yes.
And also the Green Party delegates were told, look, put a line through the whole evening. This is going to be a long conference call. This is not a conference call where we just say, look, thanks for everyone's help during the campaign. This is a conference call where they will have to make a decision, and this is what I understand is going to happen, about whether or not to support a Labour New Zealand First coalition government on confidence and supply. Of course, the Greens have no option, whatever is in this deal, quite frankly, but to support whatever Jacinda Ardern and Winston Peters have agreed, because, of course, the Green Party membership has completely ruled out ever doing a deal with any other party other than Labour. And so, really, that's how we expect it to pan out, a Labour New Zealand First government with Green support.
Matthew Hooton, thank you. I want to put that point to Sandra Lee. We are just standing by. We think an announcement is not terribly far away. But Sandra Lee, did the Greens do the right thing by saying there are no circumstances in which we would go with National, because in doing so they lost their negotiating power, right?
No, they did the principled thing. The people who vote for the Green Party vote along ideological lines. The name of the party says it all. They are people that are very concerned that we do much more for the environment, New Zealand's biodiversity, climate change, and the policies of the National Party have seen all of the environmental indicators in our country consistently becoming worse and worse. So, as a matter of principle, ideologically speaking, they could not ever hope to maintain their membership and their voter base if they were prepared to go into a coalition with National. And therein lies the dilemma. It's not just about power for power's sake. Will the Greens forever linger on the crossbenches? And they may. But it doesn't mean to say that they're not going to make a contribution, and it doesn't mean to say that they won't get outcomes.
Advisory from New Zealand First.
Sorry,
this has just come in, Peter. This has just come into our inbox, and I will read it out now. 6:25. It has just arrived. New Zealand First Leader, Right Honourable Winston Peters, will make an announcement in the Beehive Theaterette shortly. So we have the Beehive Theaterette streaming in. We would love to keep you all here for that announcement. Matthew, I know you've got to go and collect your daughter from cricket, right?
I do.
Yeah, good dad. That stuff matters. Peter Dunne, if you go, Sandra. Peter Dunne, you have a different view on. From Sandra Lee, don't you?
Yes, I do. I think the Greens made a tactical error not talking to National. And I say that for this reason. Had they done so, had they been able to conclude an arrangement with National, we would have a National Green government in place, no role for New Zealand First. This was the now or never election for New Zealand First. I think the Greens would have preempted them. I think they would have essentially either knocked them back into a small fourth place or got rid of them altogether, because I think that Winston wouldn't have stuck around. And I just think it's a golden opportunity for securing their own future as the third player in New Zealand politics that they've missed completely.
I think it's particularly difficult for the Greens just at the moment ever to even consider that option. And the reason for that, ironically, is because of Materia Ture's demise, which, of course, this program had some involvement in. Had she still been the co-leader of the Green Party, she has such respect from the Green Party activists, there is no doubt about Materia Ture's radicalism, that it would be possible potentially for someone like her to have said, look, under these particular circumstances, I'm going to make a phone call to Bill English from the nasty National Party, and this is why. But unfortunately, James Shaw doesn't have that same mana with the Green Party activists. He comes from PricewaterhouseCoopers. He helped the National Party's 1996 campaign in Wellington Central because his friend was the National Party candidate. And so those Green activists, I just don't think would have allowed him at all under these circumstances to call Bill English. But maybe in the future, when there is a Green Party leader who the Green Party activists have no doubt about their commitment to social justice and the environment. There's someone like Materia Ture or Rod Donald or Jeanette Fitzsimons, then there might be circumstances they could approach national. But I do understand, I think they should have done it. I agree with Peter in principle, but I think James Shaw would immediately have lost his job as leader had he done that.
Peter, one thing we haven't discussed tonight is we haven't talked about Jacinda Ardern and we haven't talked about Bill English. Now, the announcement is imminent and people now seem to be picking that Winston Peters is going with Labour. I haven't got a clue and I am not predicting anything. But Peter Dunne, let's talk about Bill English. John Key was seen as a kind of Midas touch politician, wasn't he? A man who kept National connected with the constituency, with ordinary folk. And when he went, I mean, there was even that Tom Scott cartoon of quoting Kenny Rogers, know when to fold him, know when to walk away, know when to run. The sense had been that Bill English was left with an inevitable defeat. Now, who knows what's going to happen within the next few minutes, but he has come this close to a fourth term for National, and there hasn't been a fourth term for the lifetime of many New Zealanders, Peter.
That's right, and that's an achievement that whatever the outcome of these negotiations shouldn't be overlooked. He's delivered a vote for National which was nearly as high, if not higher, than when they first got elected in 2008. He's seen off all his critics. It would be the ultimate dessert for him, really, to now be able to secure the Prime Ministership in his own right. But even if he doesn't, I don't think his achievement should be diminished in any way. He's ensured that the National Party in opposition is going to be strong, and that's obviously bodes well for their future. But he's going to also be remembered as the Nearly man. He was a brilliant Minister of Finance. He got the Prime Ministership eventually, but it may just be snatched from him by events beyond his control.
Yeah, well, we're about to find out. There is an advisory. It is now 5 minutes old. It says New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters will make an announcement in the Beehive Theaterette shortly. Somebody saying on Twitter, I've never heard the word theaterette so often. It's a funny old place, the Beehive Theaterette, but it is, of course, only used as a rule, except in rare circumstances, by government, Sandra Lee. And so Winston Peters is going to come in and he is going to tell us who will be the next Prime Minister of New Zealand. How do you think Jacinda Ardern will go if it's her?
I think she'll do a very good job. She was given, let's face it, a real hospital pass when Andrew Little stood down, and she absolutely campaigned her heart out. And I remember at kick-off people saying, well, does she have the stamina? And right up until the last day of the election campaign, that poor woman buried her nana and got back on the campaign trail. She's got true grit. She's bright. She's highly experienced for her age, and I think she'll do a really good job. One of the things I picked up throughout the election campaign was a real sense of urgency from people in my extended whānau and hapu who'd never voted before. They're builders, they're nurses, they're young, and they're not bothered. But this time they voted, and they voted because they saw her as being a person of their generation. And I think what we've witnessed with Ardern is, whatever happens with Winston, a genuine generational shift. Can I just pick up on one more point, and that is this too. Bill English, a year or two ago, boasted that he perfected the art of being boring. But in fairness to him, he did an excellent job in this election campaign for his political party. But if there was one thing throughout the whole campaign that absolutely appalled me, it was the consistency of Bill English and Stephen Joyce to insist that there was an $11.7 billion hole in Labour's budget and that Jacinda Ardern was going to put up individuals' tax. Now, they both knew, and anybody who knows them know they knew, that that simply wasn't true. And I don't think any political party, should ever be rewarded for such bad behaviour. It was very Donald Trump.
Well, I said at the time, even where I speak as a centre-right political commentator, I mean, I believe that was a fabrication by Stephen Joyce and Bill English. But what it did highlight, and this is going to be a major challenge for Jacinda Ardern if she is going to, and Grant Robertson, the assumed finance minister, it did highlight that they have not provided any money in their budget except for health and education. There is no money for more money for police. There's no extra money for pay rises for public servants or anything like that. They are going to have to run, if they're going to stick to their fiscal targets, zero budgets outside of health and education, as austere as anything Bill English ran in the early part of the John Key government. Now, I don't know if Labour and the Greens and New Zealand First are going to stick to what they have sworn black and blue is a very austere fiscal policy. The other thing that the new Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, is likely to be tested on...
You're stating this as fact now?
Well, it's coming. I think that's most likely. If she does become Prime Minister, she is going to have to go to Hanoi next month in just a couple of weeks as a new Prime Minister. She will be meeting there with Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, and also the Prime Minister of Japan, and she is expected to be asking to make changes to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. She has also said she wishes to make changes to the free trade agreement that New Zealand has with South Korea, at the same time as the Koreans are saying to Donald Trump, back off, you're not making changes to our trade deal. I think it is extremely unlikely that Justin Trudeau and the Japanese and the Koreans are going to agree to the changes to those trade agreements that Jacinda Ardern is seeking, and that is going to create an issue. Will New Zealand be pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is something New Zealand has lobbied for 20 years, or will Jacinda Ardern accept that Justin Trudeau will not accept the changes that she wants? Similarly with the Korean deal, is she really going to say that she's going to withdraw from the South Korean Free Trade Agreement? These are decisions that she is going to have to make in just a few weeks.
Matthew Hooton stating, if you're just joining us on Check One, Matthew Hooton with the time at 25.5 to 7, so we're still on air. Matthew stating, as fact now almost, that Jacinda Ardern is becoming Prime Minister. We don't know that yet. So people are increasingly speculating that that's the case, but we are on standby, and we have been told by New Zealand First and Winston Peters' office that the announcement is imminent. So it is going to happen very shortly. Peter Dunne, we are on standby to find out who the next Prime Minister of New Zealand will be. How do you think Jacinda Ardern will go, Peter Dunne, if it's her?
Well, if it's her, I think the first thing is she'll be a very different Prime Minister to the type we've had, certainly for the last two, if not the last three. So I think she'll need a bit of time to develop her own style and tone. I think that she's going to rely fairly heavily on those around her, and it may well be that if Winston Peters is in a key role within the cabinet, then he's going to play a much greater role in supporting and mentoring the new Prime Minister if it's her. But I think that it's going to be a huge challenge. It was a big challenge stepping up from the opposition front bench to be the party leader 4 weeks out from an election. To then make the next huge step to be Prime Minister is going to be massive, and I think she's going to really have to get a lot of support to be able to make that step fairly quickly, because the funny thing about New Zealanders is we like to give people a fair go, but we're actually also a bit unforgiving. Once they're there, we expect miracles immediately.
Yes, we're about to find out. And the Herald are reporting that Jacinda Ardern is holding the stand-up immediately after Winston Peters has had his announcement, his formal announcement in the theatre. Gosh, it's a terrible thing reading the tea leaves, so let's not. I do want to say, Sandra Lee, Matthew Hooton and Peter Dunne, thank you so much for joining us live. You've been on air for half an hour now as we wait and wait and wait, and you came on to discuss what had been announced and it hasn't been announced, so we are very, very grateful for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you. But we want to keep you.
I think then talking about Bill English and his campaign with that black mark that Sandra mentioned with the $11.7 billion.
And you think that's a fair black mark?
Yeah, it's a fair black mark. I mean, they raised an issue. They should have raised it sensibly rather than stupidly. But anyway, but I think National should stick with him. I think that if they are going into opposition, and if this new government is being formed, which has some very diverse characters, as we've been talking about, and it will only have a 3-seat majority, there has got to be a chance, not a good one, but a chance that it will fail, and that voters will have a sense of buyer's remorse with this new assumed Jacinda Ardern, Winston Peters, James Shaw government. Now, if that's the case, and there is an election, even if it's 2020 or earlier, if National was to run a buyer's remorse PR strategy for an election campaign, it has to have the product that was available. It has to have the same product. And I think it would be a profound mistake for National to change its leader if they are going into opposition right away, for the main reason that the new leader of the National Party would not get the media attention because they'd be completely overshadowed by the new Prime Minister if it is Jacinda Ardern. And so I think they should stick with Bill English for a good year and see what happens to the new government. If Jacinda Ardern turns out to be a great success, then it'll be bye-bye Bill. But it remains to be seen, and I think he at least deserves a good year as leader of the opposition.
Sandra Lee, what do you think about that? What would you do if you were the Nats? Would you... and there are some ambitious people within that caucus, aren't there, by golly, who wouldn't mind a crack at the top job. What would you do, Sandra Lee?
I think the smart money should Jacinda Ardern become the Prime Minister be on keeping Bill English for at least 1 year. He's an incredibly experienced politician. He will be very useful as the leader of the opposition against a young incoming Prime Minister. And anyway, as we know, with political parties, if they kill off their leader too soon after an election, invariably you see 2, 3, even 4 more coming in their wake.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, exactly. So I think a period of stabilisation would be the smart money for national... Can I just pick up on a point that Matthew raised earlier when he talked about the Korean Free Trade Agreement and the changes that Ardern will soon be seeking to it? I thought she made the point in the final leaders' debate very well when she pointed out that what she will be seeking is a... excuse me, I've got a cold. What she will be seeking is a reservation to prevent non-citizen, non-resident foreign speculation in our residential housing market. And as she pointed out, the Koreans themselves already have that proviso. So any of the signatories would have difficulty given that they already have that reservation themselves, objecting to New Zealand having it.
The Prime Minister of South Korea, I think, is a little bit concerned at the moment about the prospect of nuclear war and a military attack. I'm not sure that dealing with a technical change to a free trade agreement is going to be his priority.
Peter Dunne, are you missing this? Do you wish you were still in Parliament? Is all of this, as we are about to find out who the next Prime Minister of New Zealand, who the next government of New Zealand will be, do you miss it?
No, I don't actually. I thought I might, but I'm enjoying watching it, but I'm certainly not missing it.
Is it brutal?
It can be, and I think that this process has been particularly brutal, and there will be some big winners and some mighty big losers. And spare a thought for the losers, because they've been out there every day trying to keep up this popular face that they've got a deal that's going to work, and suddenly they find they've got 3 years of opposition ahead of them, or it may be less. But
Peter, can I push you on that? The losers. I mean, obviously, because this is a coalition negotiation, and either National or Labour are going to be excluded from the coalition. So clearly, on the face of it, there will be a loser, obviously. But in terms of the personalities involved, Bill English has done, as we were discussing, something quite remarkable in retaining the National Party support at fundamentally the same level that John Key delivered. Jacinda Ardern took a Labour Party that was languishing in the low to mid-20s and actually looked in desperate need of some CPR up to 36.9% of the party vote. So she looks like she's done phenomenally well too. So are the leaders at risk of looking like serious losers, whatever the outcome?
Well, the way our system operates, they will be the one who's not Prime Minister will be seen to be the loser, and I think you've just highlighted some pretty considerable achievements on both their parts, which we shouldn't overlook. Ardern rescued the Labour Party from oblivion. English achieved a result for National that they wouldn't have dreamed of getting a year ago. So they've both done remarkably well. They're both very capable people, and whichever of them ends up as Prime Minister, I think the country can be proud of. But they also are human beings, and they'll have those natural emotions and tensions and frustrations and the whole sense of, to hell with it, let's go and do something else. And I think they've just got to come back, as Bill English said, I came back, I've got to come back and do it again.
I'm just checking. Peter, we were listening to you. We're just, someone's yelling, we've lost sound. I think we were hearing Peter loud and clear then. We were, Peter. We were hearing you loud and clear. Sandra Lee, do you ever miss it? You've been out of it a long time now. Do you ever think, I wouldn't mind getting back?
Never. Never. Not at all. I'm a very political person. I was raised in a very political family, and I remain a political person and care passionately about the issues that are dear to my heart, the conservation of New Zealand's biodiversity, my own people, the survival of our language. I could go on for hours, but in truth, I found my many years in local government far more rewarding looking back than I did my years in Parliament. In many ways, our Parliament is quite a dysfunctional institution. Who really asks real questions at question time? They're pretty few and far between. I can remember being in Parliament once. We were under urgency. There was a filibuster going on, change and to that and this to that. And a little 5-year-old up in the public gallery said to her father, "They think they're smart, don't they, Dad?" And every parliamentarian looked up at the father, who was like a stunned mullet, who actually wanted to say yes, but didn't like to. No, I don't miss it.
How do we stop people being cynical about politics when it matters so much, Matthew Hooton?
Well, I think that there should be a degree of cynicism about politics. These are people who wish to have enormous powers over us. They wish to be able to extract a hunk of our income and allocate it to other people. That's an enormous power. Obviously, at the most extreme level, they maintain the power to send our military into harm's way. So I think we should be, perhaps cynical is too strong, but we should be very, very sceptical of the motivations of anybody who wishes to have those types of power over other human beings. So I don't have a problem with a bit of cynicism in the system.
We're waiting.
Well, I do, and
Sandra?
I think therein lies our problem to a certain extent. I remember the words of John Pilger when he once said, there should always be room for scepticism, but we need to avoid cynicism like the plague. And I think there's too much cynicism in New Zealand politics, quite frankly.
It's true
I think that the way in which these negotiations are being conducted in parallel, the sort of the Dutch auction that's been going on, I think they fuel public cynicism. I think if we had a much better system whereby there was much more order in the process in terms of the largest party having the first right to attempt to form a government, and then if that fails, moving to the second party, I think people would see that as a more credible process than this pretty unedifying procedure we've seen over the last couple of weeks.
We are waiting. Let's have a look. Let's have a look, Kelvin, at the Beehive Theatre. I'm hoping that Winston Peters is just going to leap into shot. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening, we are talking Sandra Lee, Peter Dunne and Matthew Hooton, generously giving us their time and insight and expertise and opinions, for which we are very grateful as we wait for an announcement that 20 minutes ago was promised shortly by Winston Peters. I guess there could be last-minute jockeying. I guess he could have called National and said, "I'm going with Labour," and they could have said, "You want to be Prime Minister?" Who knows?
I hope this show doesn't become the New Zealand version of Dewey defeats Truman. We may have just spent an hour nearly talking about Prime Minister assumed Jacinda Ardern, except for John, who's been very professional and hasn't, and then he comes and Winston announced Bill English. But I don't think so somehow.
Actually, Chris Simpson has just said on Twitter, in 1996 I was in the PM's office for the announcement. Half an hour before it, Winston Peters wrangled Treasurer out of us. We gave it to him. 96. One-term government in 96, 99, then that National Party fell apart. 2005, 2008, the Labour Party just exhausted its way out of government, didn't it? Winston Peters has never done longer than a term, has he?
Well, to be fair to Winston Peters, that the cause of his failure in that 96 to 99 era, I think, has a lot to do with the National Party backbench not liking what happened. And I think that while the New Zealand First people, if you've been talking to them over the last few days privately, they'll say, look, we are worried about the prospect of what's been described as the opposition from hell, a very strong National Party, with 44% of the voters in opposition. We've never seen an opposition like that in New Zealand before. But at the same time, balancing that, if there is to be, or was to be, a Bill English, Winston Peters government, there would be, by my count, 39 national backbenchers, some of whom would be demoted ministers,
Yes.
others who felt they should be ministers and didn't get promotion. And I'm telling you, they would have tried to undermine Bill English and Winston Peters the way the National Caucus undermined Jim Bolger and Winston Peters.
Peter Dunne, Sandra Lee and Matthew Hooton, who was speaking then, thank you so much. We understand Winston Peters is on his way to the Beehive Theatre. Peter, Sandra and Matthew, feel free, please, to stay, because we would love your expertise afterwards. But I also know, Matthew, you've got to go to cricket. Go and pick, well, it's, you know, good dad. I wish I'd done more of that stuff instead of working. And Peter and Sandra, we're going to take the media conference. So Peter, Winston Peters is going to make an announcement. We'll take the media conference live.